very close result shows that this is a divided country.
It certainly shows that there is an electorate in Poland for Mr. Duda's social conservatism that is manifested in itself as a defender of traditional Polish families against what he calls an imported ideology, which even claimed that LGBT campaigners were pushing an ideology that was worse than communism. The very large contingent of Poles living in the United Kingdom tend to vote for the opposition, and so in the first round they tended to vote for Rafał Trzaskowski. On the other hand, the large Polish diaspora in Chicago and many other places in the United States tend to vote for the conservative candidates, and in this case Andrzej Duda. So again, split.
That was the BBC's Adam Easton in the Polish capital. Pope Francis says he is very pained at Turkey's decision to convert Istanbul's famous Hagia Sophia site back into a mosque. It was first built as a Christian cathedral nearly 1,500 years ago, and since the 1930s has been a museum. The United Nations and the European Union have condemned the decision, but Turkish authorities say the site will remain open to tourists and people of all faiths. The BBC's Regid Ahmed reports.
Turkey's decision to turn the famed Hagia Sophia back into a mosque has prompted fierce discussion across Christian, Muslim and secular communities. And now the Pope has had his say.
Il mare mi porta un po' lontano.
My thoughts go to Istanbul.
A Istanbul. Penso Santa Sofia.
I think of Santa Sofia, and I am very pained.
Molto addolorato.
It was a short but clear comment, and the Pope's first public reaction to the decision, taken on Friday by President Erdogan after a court ruling which annulled Hagia Sophia's museum status. It was originally built as a Christian cathedral nearly 1,500 years ago. After the Ottoman conquest, Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque for nearly 500 years, until the 1930s, when it was converted into a secular museum once the Turkish Republic was founded. The first Muslim prayers are due to take place later this month, and defenders of the Turkish president's decision have insisted it will remain open to all faiths.
There is no reason why, or there is no regulation in the new decision by our president to prevent any visitors of any faith from visiting Hagia Sophia as a cultural site.
Regid Ahmed reporting there from Turkey. Finally, the police in Canada say a high-profile mobster whose family has been linked to convictions for bombings, extortion and murders has been shot dead. They responded to reports of a shooting at a shopping mall in Burlington, that's a suburb of Toronto, and found Pat Musitano dead at the scene. He's described as the leader of the Musitano crime family, based nearby in the city of Hamilton. He had survived a shooting attempt outside his lawyer's office just last May. His brother, Angelo, was shot dead outside his home in 2017. And that's World Watch for today. I'm Max Toll. Marnie?
Thanks, Max. And today marks the rise of Matariki, and every day this week on Midday Report we'll be giving you a quick explanation of the 9 stars in the cluster. Today we start with Pohutakawa and Matariki. Tērā Pohutakawa ka moeri ki runga he pai whakamahara moaku tau kahurangi kua ngaro. So Pohutakawa is the star connected to those that have passed on. So when the star is acknowledged, it is a time to reflect on our loved ones, those who have died since the last Matariki, and to wish them well on their journey. And now to the actual star in the cluster, Matariki. Matariki tā puapua, Matariki nāna I awake te kai ki runga. Matariki hunga nui, Matariki ahunga nui. So Matariki is the star.
And update, then I've got a few comments to make and then we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. Kia ora koutou katoa. Nice to be back. Today there are no new cases of COVID-19 to report in managed isolation or quarantine facilities in New Zealand. Likewise, it's now been 73 days since the last case of COVID-19 was acquired locally from an unknown source. So our total number of cases remains at 1,194, which we will report again to the World Health Organization today. There are no new recovered cases, so we still have 25 active cases in New Zealand, and none of those cases requires hospital level care. Just a few words on implementing our COVID-19 testing strategy. There are 3 key groups that are being tested. The first of these, of course, is all our returnees who are tested at day 3 and day 12, or around then, during their 14-day isolation period in our managed isolation facilities, or at any time if they are symptomatic. So the mandatory 14 days in managed isolation is again the mainstay of our protection at the border, and the addition of the testing twice during the visit or during the stay obviously provides that extra security. The second testing group is, of course, our testing out in the community of people with respiratory symptoms. And the main group that is being tested there are those who are judged at higher risk. For example, they may have had contact with someone who works at the border or who has returned from overseas recently. But there is also testing of other people as well across the country with symptoms, and this is a key part of our community-based surveillance. And the third group of people being tested are our people who are working in managed isolation and quarantine and or at the border. And last week we commenced the testing of those people, asymptomatic. Again, this is part of our surveillance testing, and we started with the group who are working in managed isolation and quarantine facilities, as they are have more exposure over a longer period to people returning from overseas, so are at a slightly higher risk. And this week we will be further rolling that out to include staff working at the border at our airports in particular. So last week, for example, here in Wellington, there were 34 staff working at one of the managed isolation quarantine facilities who were tested, and likewise staff were tested in both Auckland and Christchurch. And finally, our testing yesterday, being a Sunday, somewhat lower testing numbers, 1,043 processed by the laboratories, and we will expect that to increase this week as those 3 groups of people are tested. The total number of tests completed to date, for your information, is 429,643. Thank you.
This morning, the Director General and I visited one of our managed isolation facilities, the Grand Mercure in Wellington. I do want to say at this point how impressed both of us were by the commitment of the staff at these facilities. That commitment is typical of what is happening around the rest of the country. For obvious reasons around health, safety and security, we didn't talk directly to the returnees at the Grand Mercure, but we do recognise the efforts of the tens of thousands of New Zealanders who have returned home so far, and the efforts that they have been going to do the right thing by all of us. So today I want to reinforce that the government is committed to doing the right thing by them. There are a range of supports available to people during their time in managed isolation and quarantine. They have health and wellbeing assessments on arrival at the facilities. That includes questions about mental health and wellbeing. They're also provided with information on any mental health issues, substance use, and wellbeing resources that can include online therapeutic tools. They receive a 19-page booklet that provides essential information such as what they can expect from the facility, the provision of food, medical care and welfare support. Within the facilities, people are able to access mental health support, managed physical activity, and access to primary health care during the course of their stay. We're aware that growing numbers of people are returning to New Zealand, and that there are associated pressures with that may arise within the facilities. We also recognise that getting home in itself can be very stressful for people and for their families. So we'll continue to supply the support and adapt the sort of support that people need to meet their wellbeing and health needs. It's important that we show compassion towards those New Zealanders who are returning and who are using these facilities, and acknowledge that they are playing their part in keeping our team of 5 million COVID-19 free. A brief word about staffing at the facilities. The staffing scales up and down at the facilities as required, depending on the number of guests who are staying at the facility and where they are in the duration of their stay. So for instance, there are normally higher numbers of health staff on arrival day and on checkout dates, as well as higher numbers of health staff when there is swabbing taking place. There is a nurse at every facility every day. Health staff are well trained to follow the standard operating procedures. Staffing levels are constantly monitored by each region where the managed isolation and quarantine facilities are located to ensure that appropriate care is in place for all of the people all of the time. So I want to finish my introductory remarks today with a request again for all New Zealanders when it comes to keeping us all safe from COVID-19. And that is to ask every one of us to keep a digital diary of our whereabouts using the COVID-19 digital tracer. It's free, it is secure, it is your information, and it's going to be a key tool for us if we ever need to reach the point where we have to do more widespread contact tracing. So to update the numbers, the contact tracer has 594,000 registrations. There are now 77,564 QR code posters around the country where people can check into where they have been, and the number of poster scans so far is 1,409,277. With that, happy to take your questions.
Deportees are you expecting the Australian government to send back here in the near future, and how disappointed is the government that Australia is resuming this practice during a pandemic?
Well, look, I want to restate the fact that the New Zealand government is opposed to the way Australia is handling the deportation issue. We firmly believe that these are Australia's problems, not New Zealand's problems. They are, however, within their legal right to do what they are doing. We are expecting around 30 to arrive as part of this cohort. Whilst we're opposed to the deportation policy of the Australian government, we are working closely with them to ensure that it is well managed. So the Australian government have given us a reassurance that they won't deport further people to New Zealand without first working with us to ensure that all of the logistical arrangements around that are well planned. We have the capacity to receive them and all of the appropriate safeguards are in place.
Has the government actually got a hotel lined up at the moment? Have you sorted that out, or are you still working?
Yes, there is a hotel that has been identified. It will be a separate hotel from where others are staying. It is an inner city hotel, as I have mentioned this morning. There will be enhanced security at it for the duration of the stay.
Why is enhanced security necessary, and why is a dedicated facility necessary? Because pre-COVID, these detainees would be released immediately into the community, and that is going to occur once they've spent their time in quarantine. So what specific risk do these people pose?
Look, obviously people with a higher risk of potential offending because of their past backgrounds may well be within the cohort, and so therefore we are just taking extra precautions to ensure that none of them are prematurely leaving the isolation facilities before they have had their clearance to do so.
The government doesn't trust these individuals.
Look, I think all New Zealanders expect us to be taking all reasonable steps to ensure that those who are returning to New Zealand are doing their bit by doing their 14 days of isolation, having their tests, and being clear that they are free of COVID before they re-enter the community.
All three of these deportees already came last month, but they were deemed low risk and they were part of the regular kind of intake. Are these 30 or so, are they deemed high risk?
Look, part of what we have been doing is looking at the overall level of security around our managed isolation and quarantine facilities, looking at where and how we need to strengthen those, and you will have seen, and we've talked about this last week, that there are a number of measures already put in place around fencing, around security, around having police on site and so on. As part of our overall risk assessment, we continue to strengthen the security arrangements around the managed isolation and quarantine facilities where it's appropriate to do so.
Are these 30 deemed high risk, or anyone within the 30?
Look, I don't have the details of the backgrounds of each and every one of the people who is in this particular cohort, but I do want to reiterate we're taking a very precautionary approach here.
What does enhanced security look like? What does it mean on the ground?
Look, it's basically more people there to make sure that the facilities are being kept secure. There's rigorous kind of site assessment, if you like, before people arrive of where there might be any vulnerabilities on the site so that mitigations can be put in place. I don't want to go into all of the ins and outs of the individual security planning because to some extent that might defeat the purpose of doing it, but there has been a very rigorous process of preparing for the arrival of this particular cohort of returnees.
Australia paying for it? Because one of the problems last week was you had someone escape because you had a security guard who couldn't, stop them from leaving. Is it more police or is it security guards that don't have the power to stop someone from leaving?
Look, the police are very actively involved in this process, and so the police will certainly have a presence there. It will probably be greater than the presence that they have at the other managed isolation facilities. The police have been very, very engaged in the planning process.
Are they on a single charter flight or are they on several charter flights? And who's funding those charter flights?
They are on a single charter flight that is funded by the Australian government.
Which other officials will be present? Will there be, for example, mental health services, military?
Yes to both.
There'll be military on site?
Yes, there will be, as there are at the other facilities. There will be police on site. There will be all of the health services on site that we're providing in all of these facilities.
Have you been briefed, just to clarify, on who these people are? Because we have seen briefing papers to the Correction Minister where concerns are raised that child sex offenders will be among the deportees coming back. Have you had any concerns such as that being raised with you?
No, obviously I'm as you will know, the oversight of managed isolation and quarantine facilities sits with Dr. Woods, so if any ministers were being briefed on the particular details, it would be her and the Minister for Corrections, because of course there is an ongoing role once they've finished their time in managed isolation around reintegration. We have, as a government, put in place additional processes to support people who are deported from Australia to reintegrate into New Zealand society. Those things were in place, of course, before COVID-19. The 2 weeks of isolation delays the commencement of that work, but that still kicks in as soon as they walk out the door of the managed isolation. So both of those ministers, I imagine, will have a greater level of detail than I would have as the Minister of Health.
You seem to suggest that if the exact location is revealed, that vigilante justice could occur. Do you have any evidence to support that?
Look, what I do want to say, and we have seen evidence of where people have been named, and there has been a case last week that they have become a target for bullying and their families as well. And I think we just all have to take a bit of a breath here. Where people break the rules, the process of law will kick in, and people should leave these matters to the process of law and not take matters into their own hands.
There are reports that there's a suspected COVID case in a hotel housing detainees in Melbourne. What extra precautions are being taken given some of the detainees are coming from Melbourne?
Look, as I said, they will follow all of the precautions that we're asking anyone to come into New Zealand to follow. The whole process is designed on the basis that we should assume, until we know otherwise, that anyone coming into the country across the border could be bringing COVID-19 with them. And so we assume the same thing with this group of people, that they will be tested during their stays, and they won't be released until we're comfortable that they don't have COVID-19 and they're not bringing it into the country.
The government's worked with Air New Zealand to put the brakes on new bookings because we've got too many people coming into managed isolation. Kiwis returning from around the world, you've had to put the brakes on that. And when the Australian government says, hey, we want to send a bunch of deportees back, they run off and organise a new hotel, do you think people are going to think this is a bit unfair?
Look, we don't have to like it to know that we have to work within the processes that the Australian government have put in place. Obviously, New Zealand is disappointed with the policy overall. It's something that the Prime Minister has raised several times with the Prime Minister of Australia. We don't agree with the approach that they're taking, but they are within their rights to do it.
Are you going to send Australia a bill for the cost of that hotel?
No.
On Australia, have you discussed at all with your equivalent in Victoria exactly how the outbreak happened there and what risks led to that happening? It seemed like their managed isolation facilities were a big part of it. Are you confident that our managed isolation facilities wouldn't let something like that happen?
I'll start with the last part of your question. I am confident in the processes in our managed isolation facilities. So far, over 29,000 people through our facilities, and we haven't had any cases of community-acquired COVID-19 as a result of people coming out of those facilities. So I am confident, and this was reinforced by what the Minister and I saw this morning in terms of the training of the staff, the processes and procedures that are in place. I think very encouraging there. I haven't spoken with my Victorian counterpart, but I do have a meeting planned in the next week or two with my counterpart in Australia, and this is one of the things we'll be discussing, because we continue to be very interested in learning from each other about what else we can do to improve both managed isolation and quarantine, but also the follow-up in terms of contact tracing and testing that they are doing, not just in Victoria, but of course now in New South Wales as well.
In Victoria.
Sorry?
In your view, what went wrong in Victoria?
Look, until I've had a conversation, and I'm just as interested in as you are in finding out what the issues were that led to that infection getting out of the managed isolation facility into the community.
Lessons around, and maybe this is one for the Minister, will you take lessons around what New South Wales are doing, charging people for quarantine?
Look, the issues around charging are something that Cabinet will be considering next week, and Dr Woods is doing the work on that and will be bringing further advice to Cabinet. Of course, we're looking at what other countries are doing. We're looking at what the right, appropriate response for New Zealand is.
Could you just take, say, because you know the legal stuff that's going on here with us, could you just take what they've done there and make it into a New Zealand thing? Is it possible?
Look, with all of these things, we have to do what the right thing is for New Zealand. We have to operate within the context of New Zealand law, and of course we can look at what other countries are doing as a model or as examples, but we ultimately have to make the decisions about what's right for New Zealand, which we're working on at the moment.
Of the 1,043 tests processed yesterday, do you have numbers of how many of them were in MIQ?
Yes, we do. I don't know if you've got them off the top of your head. I've got them in a piece of paper. I should have them on a piece of paper here. 672.
So only 400 tests were carried out in the community yesterday across New Zealand. Is that good enough?
Well, look, I think, as we've said, we need to look at 7-day averages. We know that there's a lower testing rate during the weekends. That's been a part of the overall picture since we started doing COVID-19 testing all those months ago. So we do expect numbers to go down over the weekend. I do want to see the overall level of community testing going up, and I've made that expectation clear.
Oh yes, so the rolling day, the 7-day rolling average was about 2,000 yesterday, which is still well below the 4,000 that you said needed to urgently go up to last week, and that still hasn't happened.
Look, the trend is going back up again, and I'm happy to see that the trend is going back up again after a period of, after a relatively steep drop-off. We did expect to see a drop-off after what was quite a high peak, so we did expect to see those numbers coming down. I think what I was indicating last week is I felt that we'd come too far down. We needed to see the numbers lifting again.
Is the case definition perhaps too stringent?
Look, I'll get Dr Bloomfield to comment on that.
Thank you, Minister. So I don't think the case definition is too stringent. I'd make two comments. First of all, to reiterate a comment I've made a number of times right from the start, the important thing is that we are testing the right people, and that is why our focus is on those coming across the border and those working at and around the border. And we also want to have enough testing being done in the community as part of our surveillance to ensure that if there are any cases out there, we are detecting them, and that the spread of testing is good both by region and by ethnic group. So the case definition is there to make sure that we are testing all the people who are at higher risk, and we need to complement that with others who are symptomatic to make sure we're just detecting any cases. But the key thing here is making sure we're testing the right people.
Dr Bloomfield,
Minister Hipkins mentioned that on Friday that there'll be some changes and updates being made to the tracing app. Can you give us a bit more of an update of what's happened?
I don't have any further details on that, but we'll cover that during the week.
And on the back of that question about the app, is there any work underway for people to retroactively add their details in? So if they go somewhere, then they forget to scan in, then to be able to add it in later?
Can I come back to you on that and check it and see if that functionality may be something that's being added? But I don't have the details of that at the moment.
Also on the app, and this could be a question for Dr Bloomfield or the Minister as you see fit. According to the numbers that Minister Hipkins just gave us, over the weekend, each day for every one poster scan that was conducted, there were 6 unscanned posters. So a very, very small percentage of printed posters are actually being scanned even once each day. That's pretty consistent over the past week as well. Why is no one using this app, and what's going to change to
Can I comment, and the Minister may want to as well? It's very important that people do scan the posters. It's easy to do and it's quick. And the key point here is and I experienced this over the last week. It feels like life is back to normal in New Zealand. And in that regard, we are very fortunate. However, as you will have seen, yesterday, the highest number of daily reported infections globally, huge numbers of new infections in the USA, Brazil, India, and South Africa in particular. There is a significant pandemic still offshore, and we need to be absolutely vigilant in taking that seriously. Please do download the app, because even just updating your contact details and us being able to hold those and be able to contact you quickly should we need is extremely important. And it's no trouble to just scan the app and keep that record. So I just can only keep encouraging people to do so.
If I could just add to that, as I indicated last week, the app is being updated. The next update is likely to be towards the end of this month or near the end of this month. That will include the ability to manually add extra contacts in where there isn't a QR code in place. I will go away and check to make sure that that allows for people to do that retrospectively rather than just forward-looking as well.
Rolling out any media or anything like that, or just use these 1 o'clock stand-ups to get that message out there?
There is further advice coming to me as the Minister of Health around what more we can do to promote what people can do around contact tracing. So I've yet to receive that advice, but I have had some discussions about that. The most recent discussion I had about that was on Friday, and there's further advice coming.
And that advice is from the Minister of Health?
It's from the all-of-government group who are overseeing the COVID response.
The COVID-19 Privacy Leak, last Friday you signalled that, or mentioned that officials were looking at the email distribution lists for the COVID-19 patients, and you weren't sure if they'd made any changes. Have you been briefed on that? Have they taken anyone off the list?
I haven't been briefed. I don't know whether Dr. Bloomfield's in a position after only being back for a few hours. Not yet, but we'll certainly come back to you on that.
Do you have any update on the timeline of the inquiry? Will it still go on until the end of July, or do you think it'll report back sooner?
Look, I don't want to add anything further to the comments I've already made about the timetable for that, because I think it is important that Michael Heron does the inquiry against the terms of reference on the timetable that he thinks is appropriate in the circumstances.
The slogan to unite against COVID again. What was the reason behind it? Is there something happening in the background that you're worried it might be community transmission, or was it just a case of?
I think the comments that were made at the time on social media and through the all-of-government group was that we don't want to send New Zealanders the message that the COVID-19 challenge is behind us and that it's now all about economic recovery. We still have a public health effort in front of us as long as COVID-19 remains rampant around the rest of the world and continues to grow in numbers around the rest of the world. We still have to be vigilant here in New Zealand, and I think that Unite Against COVID-19 message is one that New Zealanders are very familiar with. They understood what it meant, and they understood what they need to do to be part of that collective effort.
Who made the decision? Who advised you? Who advised and who made the decision around that? Did someone come and say, look, people are just behaving as normal, we really need to ramp it up again? Who was it?
It was the all-of-government group. My understanding is the all-of-government group made the decision to ramp that part of the campaign up again. It was not a decision that was made by ministers.
So was it wasn't because it was seen as political?
No.
What observations is that decision based on?
Look, you'd need to ask them that. All I can outline for you is their thinking behind the shift, which was what they've conveyed to me and what they have said publicly.
Dr. Bloomfield,
a couple more questions.
Dr. Bloomfield, were you disappointed to find out that the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust was still getting those active case numbers, those active case details, or did that seem reasonable to you, even when community transition is 71 days ago, to just still have a helicopter trust, a private charity, receiving patient details?
So the process for notifying the Auckland Regional Helicopter Trust and the other helicopter trusts is part of a process that was established months ago to notify emergency services where there were cases, in case they had to visit a premise where there might be someone who had an infection and they could protect their staff and take appropriate measures. Nothing had changed in that process, and in fact we had confirmed with all of those agencies the appropriate place to send that information to, which was part of a well-established process. So that's what I can say about that. My understanding is that the team had explicitly sought from all the organisations who were receiving that information for a very particular purpose. In a well-established process, the team had confirmed what the appropriate email address was to send the information to. Thank you.
Disappointed that it ended up going on from
Well, I don't want to make a comment about that because it's at the moment the subject of the inquiry by Michael Heron.
I think the trust should have stopped receiving the patient details as soon as 70 days ago when community transmission appeared to stop here.
So just to reiterate, that was a well-established process, and the Trust was one of a number of emergency organisations receiving that information for a very particular purpose, and the question of whether it should or shouldn't have continued, I think, will be one of the things looked at through the inquiry.
All right. You can have the lucky last question in that case.
I'm not sure if you answered this before. Which city are the deportees coming into? Are you able to say that?
Auckland. It is Auckland, yes. Now, I'm not with you tomorrow. I am available in Auckland for interrogation by your colleagues up there, but I'll be back on Wednesday. So thank you, everybody.
Wellington, to being all of those things, because actually we've got less competition, ironically. But, how